There are places in America that feel untouched by the chaos of the modern world. Small towns, nestled between endless fields of corn and wheat, where trust is the currency of daily life. Places like Millbrook County, where doors are left unlocked, keys are left in ignitions, and a person's word is their bond. It's a community built on the simple, deeply held belief that you know your neighbors, you know their families, you know their struggles, and you know, without a doubt, that you are safe among them. This belief is the bedrock of their existence, and it's what makes what happened here not just a crime, but a profound and devastating betrayal. In the summer of 2013, the Brennan family's strawberry fields were exploding with fruit. It was a good year, the best in a decade, and at the heart of the operation was their 9-year-old daughter, Lily. She was the kind of girl who seemed to carry the sunlight with her, bright, energetic, with a smile that could disarm even the most stoic old farmer at the weekend market. She had her whole life mapped out, a year of working on the farm to save money, then off to the state university to study agriculture. She didn't want to escape the farm. She wanted to make it better. On the morning of July 15th, a perfect, cloudless Monday, Lily loaded the last basket of fresh-picked strawberries into the back of her father's old pickup truck. She was wearing her favorite dress, a simple yellow sundress dotted with tiny flowers. It was her lucky dress, she'd told her mother, convinced it helped her sell more berries. She waved goodbye, pulled out of the long gravel driveway, and headed for the farmer's market, a 20-minute drive she had made hundreds of times before. She never arrived. When she didn't return by evening, her parents began to worry. By the next morning, the worry had turned to panic. The sheriff was called, and a search was organized. Volunteers from every farm in the county scoured the back roads and ditches. They found nothing. No truck, no berries, no Lily. Her disappearance was absolute. It was as if she had simply evaporated under the hot July Sunday. In the absence of evidence, theories began to fill the void. The sheriff, a man just a few years from retirement, favored the simplest explanation. He'd seen it a dozen times before. A young person, feeling the pressure of a small town, simply decides to leave. A seasonal farmhand, a picker who had been working a few properties over, had also disappeared around the same time. The narrative wrote itself. Lily Brennan, tired of farm life, had run off with a boy to chase a bigger dream on the California coast. It was a story that offered a strange kind of comfort. It was a choice, not a tragedy. It meant she was alive, happy, and free. For her parents, clinging to any hope they could find, this story became a lifeline. They chose to believe their daughter was living out an adventure, even if it meant she had left them behind without a word. For the rest of Millbrook County, it was a sad but understandable chapter. The search was called off after a week. The official case file was closed in less than 6 months. Lily Brennan became a cautionary tale told to other restless teenagers, a ghost of a girl who wanted more than their quiet corner of the world could offer. And for 2 years, that was the end of the story. The town healed, the fields were harvested, and life went on. But the truth hadn't run away. It was buried, festering in the dark, waiting patiently for someone to uncover it. And it was infinitely more monstrous than anyone in that trusting, quiet town could have ever imagined. 2 years can feel like a lifetime, or it can feel like no time at all. For Emma Watts, it was both. Lily's absence was a constant, dull ache, a ghost that rode beside her on every drive, in every quiet moment. She had taken over Lily's route, delivering honey from her family's hives to the same market Lily was supposed to have reached that day. It was a ritual, a way of keeping some small piece of her friend alive. And it was on one of those drives, with the afternoon sun slanting through the dusty windshield, that everything changed. It wasn't a conscious decision to stop, it was a reaction. A flicker of color seen through a dense stand of trees lining the old Hendricks property, an abandoned farmstead that had been decaying for nearly 2 decades. The flash was a specific shade of yellow. A warm, buttery yellow that seized something in her chest before her brain could even assign it a name. Her foot hit the brake, the truck skidding slightly on the loose gravel of the shoulder. Most people would have driven on. It was nothing, just a trick of the light. But for Emma, it was a summons. She turned onto the overgrown access road, branches like skeletal fingers scraping against the truck's paint. The air grew still and heavy as the main road disappeared behind her. The Hendricks house stood in silence, a monument to failure and forgotten memories. Everyone knew the story. Bad loans, bad luck, and a quiet, grief-stricken mechanic named Carl Hendricks, who had lost his wife and his farm, retreating to a small, lonely life in town. The house was a wreck, its windows like clouded, blind eyes. But as Emma got out, leaving her own engine running like a nervous heartbeat, she noticed the path leading around the back of the house was worn down to the bare dirt. This was not old decay. This was recent. She followed the path, her boots crunching on dry leaves, a sense of deep primal dread rising in her throat. And then she saw it. Stretched between two dying oak trees was a clothesline, and hanging from it, perfectly spaced as if arranged for a gallery exhibition, were 7 dresses. The scene was so profoundly wrong, so surreal, that for a moment Emma could only stare, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The first was a blue gingham dress, the fabric so weathered it was nearly transparent in places. Next, a simple green shift, faded by 100 suns and storms. Each one was a relic, a silent testament to a life interrupted, and the third dress in the line stole the air from her lungs. It was yellow, the same warm, buttery yellow, dotted with tiny, faded flowers. It hung motionless in the dead air, a perfect, vibrant memory in a world of gray decay. She knew every stitch of that fabric. She had been there when Lily bought it, had watched her spin in the dressing-room mirror, beaming, her voice full of the easy joy that Emma missed more than anything. "It's wholesome but cute," Lily had said, "perfect for the market." A guttural sob escaped Emma's lips as her knees buckled, and she fell into the dirt. It was Lily's dress, the lucky dress. 2 years of searching, of scanning crowds, of false hope and crushing disappointment, and it had all led to this. Her sister's ghost hanging on a clothesline in the one place no one ever thought to look. Every comforting lie the town had told itself, every easy explanation, it all burned away in that single horrifying moment. Lily hadn't run away. Something had happened to her. And the proof was right here. It was a flag planted in hell, a message left by a monster. Her hands, shaking uncontrollably, fumbled for the phone in her pocket. She had to call Tyler. He had to see. He had to know. The sound of Tyler Brennan's truck tearing up the gravel road was a violent intrusion into the dead silence of the property. He was out before the engine was fully off, his face a mask of disbelief and desperate hope. He saw the clothesline, saw the dresses, but his eyes locked on only one. He walked toward the yellow sundress, not like a man approaching a piece of evidence, but like someone approaching a sacred, terrible monument. His hand reached out, then pulled back, afraid that touching it might make it real, or worse, make it crumble to dust. Emma didn't need to say anything. The dress spoke for itself. While Tyler stood frozen by his sister's ghost, Emma's shock began to sharpen into a cold, clear focus. Her gaze was drawn back to the barn, the metallic sound she'd heard earlier. The freshly oiled hinges. Someone had been here recently. Someone had been careless. Pushing past her fear, she stepped inside. The barn was a tomb of forgotten agriculture, old plows and cedars sleeping under thick shrouds of dust. But in the far corner, the modern tool chest gleamed, an object from another world, its lid left open in haste. Scattered on the ground around it were papers, maintenance logs fluttering in the slight breeze from the open door. She picked one up. Morrison Farm, September 2009. The name at the bottom, signed in a neat, unassuming script, was Carl Hendricks. The Morrison girl, Ashley, had vanished that same month. Emma remembered the whispers, the accepted story of her running off with a boy she met online. She grabbed another log. Holstead Farm, July 2003. Again, the signature of Carl Hendricks. Jenna Holstead had disappeared that summer, supposedly to chase dreams of Hollywood stardom. A cold dread, heavier and more suffocating than grief, began to settle in Emma's stomach. It was a pattern. A blueprint for a predator. She gathered the papers and walked back outside, her legs unsteady. "Tyler," she said, her voice quiet but firm. He finally tore his eyes away from the dress. She held out the maintenance logs. "Carl Hendry's," she said. "He was at every farm that lost a girl." Tyler took the papers, his face draining of all color as he read. The quiet mechanic who had fixed their equipment for years, who had shared coffee at their kitchen table, who had offered his condolences after Lily disappeared. The man's name was on every page, a recurring signature tying together 2 decades of tragedy that everyone had dismissed as coincidence. "He was here," Tyler whispered, his voice cracking. "The week before, she vanished. He fixed the harvester." The implications were staggering. Carl Hendrys hadn't just been a witness to these tragedies. He was the architect. He had used his trusted position to move through their community like a phantom, scouting his targets, learning their routines, waiting for the perfect moment to strike during the chaotic harvest season, when a girl's absence could be easily explained away. As this horrifying reality crashed down on them, Emma walked back to the barn, Tyler following like a man in a trance. There had to be more. In the bottom of the tool chest, beneath a set of wrenches, she found it. A small, black ledger. It wasn't for equipment. Its pages were filled with dates and initials, followed by numbers that were unmistakably prices. AC, $30,000. JH, $25,000. It was a receipt book for stolen lives, a catalog of human souls sold like livestock. Tyler's breath hitched as he read over her shoulder. This was the fate of the other girls, the ones whose dresses weren't on the line. Then Emma's finger stopped on the last entry. July 2013, the initials were chillingly familiar. LB. Lily Brennan. But where the others had a dollar amount, Lily's entry was different. There was no price. There was only a single word, penned in Carl's meticulous, steady hand. A word that was not about business, but about possession. A word that plunged them into a new, deeper, and more terrifying circle of hell. Kept. Kept. The word echoed in the silence between them, a declaration of ownership more chilling than any confession of murder. It meant Lily hadn't been sold. It meant she hadn't been discarded. For 2 years, she had been held, possessed by a monster who viewed her not as a product, but as a prize. For Tyler and Emma, sitting on the dusty floor of that barn, the word was a double-edged sword. It was the terrifying proof of her prolonged suffering, but it was also a fragile, desperate sliver of hope. She could still be alive. By the time Sheriff Garrett and the state police descended on the property, turning the forgotten farm into a full-scale crime scene, night had fallen. The 7 dresses, now illuminated by the cold, sterile beams of forensic floodlights, seemed even more spectral. The investigation accelerated at a pace Millbrook County had never seen. The ledgers, the maintenance logs, it was an undeniable roadmap to 2 decades of terror. But Carl Hendrys was a ghost. He wasn't at his workshop, he wasn't at his apartment, and a check of the Brennan farm revealed he had finished his work on their combine and left hours ago. Long before Emma ever set foot on his abandoned property, he had simply vanished. Then, as Tyler sat in the back of a squad car, the screen of his phone lit up, displaying a text from an unknown number. 4 words that made his blood run cold: "Stop looking or she dies." The hunt was no longer a one-sided investigation into the past. It had become an active, deadly game, and the monster was now talking back. The kidnapper, presumably Carl himself, was watching them. He knew they had found the dresses. He knew they had the ledger. He was one step ahead, taunting them from the shadows. Sheriff Garrett immediately tried to trace the number, but it was a burner, a digital dead end. The only option was to play the game. Tyler, with Garrett feeding him instructions, typed back a single demand: proof of life. After a torturous silence, a photo appeared on his screen. It was unmistakably Lily. She was thinner, almost skeletal, her eyes wide and hollow in the harsh glare of a single light bulb. She was holding up 3 fingers against a grimy concrete wall. In the corner of the photo, a digital timestamp confirmed it had been taken just minutes before. She was alive. Emma gasped in a mix of horror and relief, but the relief was short-lived. A second text followed immediately. You have 24 hours to call off the investigation. Every cop, every news van, everyone stops looking. Or she disappears forever, and this time you'll never even find a address. The threat hung in the air, an impossible choice. A public search might spook him into killing her, but calling it off would mean letting a serial predator walk free, with no guarantee he would ever release Lily. The investigation turned to the past, to the victims in the ledger. They visited Dorothy Corwin, the mother of Ashley, the girl who vanished in 2009. She had never believed the runaway story, and for years she had kept her daughter's diary. In it, they found the chilling proof of Carl's methods. An entry from the week before Ashley disappeared read, "Mr. Hendries was here again. He watches me. Not in a normal way, like he's shopping. It was a pattern of methodical, patient evil. He wasn't just a mechanic. He was an appraiser, judging his future victims in their own homes." The investigation had a timeline, a motive, and a suspect. But the suspect held the ultimate bargaining chip, Lily's life. With the clock ticking, every decision carried an unbearable weight. They were no longer just solving a crime. They were negotiating with a monster for a single, precious life. It's a moment that forces you to ask, what would you do if the clock started ticking on someone you loved? Follow the rules of a monster, or risk everything to fight back? The first 24 hours of a high-stakes investigation are often described as controlled chaos. But for Tyler Brennan and the small team of officers led by Sheriff Garrett, it was simply chaos. They had a ghost for a suspect, a ticking clock, and the life of a young woman hanging in the balance. Every lead, every potential location turned into a dead end. Carl Hendris had spent 20 years perfecting his craft, and that included knowing how to disappear. As the hours bled away, hope began to curdle into a grim, suffocating despair. And then, a new message arrived. It wasn't a threat, it was an invitation. Millbrook Diner, 2 p.m., back corner booth. Come alone, or she dies. The diner was a local institution, a place of comforting normalcy, which made it the perfect setting for a meeting that would be anything but normal. Tyler sat alone in the worn vinyl booth, every nerve on fire. He watched every customer, every passing car, expecting to see the face of Carl Hendris. Instead, a young woman in a grocery store uniform, her face pale and her hands trembling, slid into the seat across from him. Her eyes were a familiar shade of blue. Tyler recognized them from an old family photo he'd seen in Carl's file. "You're his daughter," Tyler said, his voice flat. Her name was Megan. She spoke in a rushed, terrified whisper, her eyes darting constantly toward the door. She claimed her father thought she was at work, that she only had 10 minutes. And then she confirmed their deepest hope and fear. Lily was alive. Megan slid a phone across the table, displaying a recent photo. Lily was gaunt, sitting on a dirty mattress in a concrete room, but she was undeniably alive. This photo wasn't a taunt from a predator. It was a desperate plea from an unwilling accomplice. Megan had been living with her father's monstrous secret since she was 12 years old, trapped in a prison of fear and complicity. He had caught her looking at his files years ago and threatened to sell her into the same network if she ever spoke a word. But the story she told was far worse than a series of kidnappings. Her father wasn't just keeping girls. He was the local supplier for a vast interstate human trafficking network. She slid a piece of paper across the table with 11 names on it. 7, she explained, had been sold overseas. 3 had died in transit. Lily was the only one he had ever kept. The reason? It was a detail so twisted, so pathologically narcissistic, that it defied comprehension. "She looks exactly like my mother did at 19, Megan whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "When he saw Lily at your farm, something that was already broken inside of him, it just shattered. The quiet, grieving mechanic wasn't just a predator. He was a man trying to resurrect a ghost, to possess a memory by imprisoning a living, breathing person." Megan then revealed something else. Her father had another victim. A 15-year-old girl named Katie Summers, taken just 3 weeks prior. He was keeping her and Lily together. As she spoke, she pushed a small, worn notebook across the table. It was her secret diary of her father's crimes. Everything she could remember: dates, names of buyers, shipping routes disguised as equipment deliveries, hidden compartments in trailers. It was the complete operational blueprint for his 20-year reign of terror. "Why now?" Tyler asked, his mind reeling from the cascade of horrors. "Why help us now?" Megan's composure finally broke. "Because he's planning something," she cried. "And because Lily, she won't break. 2 years, and she still fights him. He's getting frustrated. I'm scared he's going to kill her, or worse, sell her anyway." She stood to leave, pressing a small burner phone into Tyler's hand. "He moves them constantly. I'll text you when he's on a service call. It will give you a window." She hesitated, her face a portrait of agony. "Those 3 girls who died," she said, her voice barely audible, "they didn't die in transit. They died in training. And I had to help him bury them." With that final, soul-crushing confession, she was gone, leaving Tyler alone in the booth with the evidence of a nightmare far bigger than he could have ever imagined. Megan's notebook was a roadmap to a hell that was not only real, but meticulously organized. Back at the sheriff's station, the small conference room had become a war room. State police detectives and a stunned Sheriff Garrett went through each page, a 2-decade history of evil laid bare in a teenager's handwriting. Dates, routes, partial license plates, and a list of buyers identified only by nicknames: the banker, the professor, Chicago Jim. Megan had documented how her father modified farm equipment trailers at a specific welding shop, adding hidden compartments with their own ventilation designed for human cargo. The weights on his shipping manifests were always off, padded by the weight of the girls hidden inside. It was a sophisticated interstate trafficking operation, and it had been running like a well-oiled machine for 20 years. This was no longer a local matter. It was FBI territory. As federal agents were being dispatched, the encrypted burner phone buzzed to life. It was Megan. She was locked in her room. Her father, paranoid and angry after the diner meeting, was loading both Lily and Katie into a white van in the driveway. She could hear Katie crying. He was on the phone with a buyer. The deal was happening tonight. In a flurry of terrified messages, Megan sent photos of shipping manifests, more Polaroids of victims, and finally, a long-distance shot of her father's phone screen. A text conversation was clearly visible. A buyer was negotiating for both girls. Carl refused to sell Lily, the special one, but agreed to sell Katie. The price? $50,000. The time? Midnight. The place? Location 3. Emma, who had been quietly cross-referencing every detail in the notebook, found a hand-drawn map. Megan had marked 3 X's. 3 locations for sales. Location 3 was the old Bracken Ridge Supply Depot, an isolated, sprawling warehouse complex just 15 minutes away. It was 10:30 p.m. They had 90 minutes. As law enforcement mobilized, setting up a silent perimeter around the depot, a call came through on Tyler's regular phone. It was Carl. His voice was calm, cold, and utterly devoid of panic. He knew Megan had betrayed him. He had known for months. "You think I survived this long by being stupid," he sneered. "There are people on my payroll you'd never suspect. You can't touch me." In the background, Tyler could hear a girl crying, and then Lily's voice, faint but clear, screaming his name, followed by the sickening sound of an impact, and then silence. "She never learns," Carl said conversationally. The line went dead. The depot was a maze of shadows and rusting metal. Carl's white van was parked beside a large semi-truck. A deal was in progress. The plan was to wait for the transaction, to catch both Carl and the buyer with the girls as evidence. Through a pair of binoculars, Tyler watched from Garrett's cruiser as Carl finally opened the van's rear doors. Inside, they could see Katie Summers, unconscious and bound, but she was alone. Lily was not there. Before anyone could process this new, horrifying twist, the order was given. Move in. Police vehicles converged, lights blazing. The buyer dropped to his knees instantly, but Carl, seeing he was cornered, ran for the warehouse, yelling, "You don't understand. There are more girls. I'll tell you where." He reached into his pocket. In the chaos and the flashing lights, it was an impossible call to make. Multiple officers saw the movement as a threat. The shots were almost simultaneous. Carl Hendris went down, his 2-decade reign of terror ending in a pool of blood on the asphalt. Tyler sprinted from the car, screaming, "We needed him alive." He grabbed the dying man's shoulders. "Where is she? Where is Lily?" Carl's eyes were already glazing over. With his final gurgling breath, he whispered, "Safe," and then he was gone. All his secrets, all his locations, all the names of all the other girls gone with him. Despair washed over Tyler. They had failed. Katie was safe, but Lily was lost forever. And then his burner phone buzzed one last time. It was Megan. I know where she island, the Mitchell farm. Second root cellar, behind a false wall. For his special projects. Tyler, there's another girl there too. The race to the old Mitchell farm was a silent, desperate prayer against time. The property was a skeleton in the moonlight, a place they had searched and cleared just days before. But Megan was there, waiting, a ghost herself at the mouth of the main root cellar. She didn't lead them to a new door. She led them to a wall. A solid concrete wall at the back of the empty first chamber. As she pressed on a specific, unmarked section, a hidden seam was revealed, and a heavy panel swung inward with a groan of long, unused hinges. The smell that rolled out was the first assault, a foul mix of damp earth, bleach, and human despair. Then came the sound, a weak, rhythmic crying. Tyler pushed past everyone, his flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive darkness of the hidden chamber. The space was a purpose-built dungeon. 2 cells, lined with sound-dampening foam, faced each other. In one, a young woman he didn't recognize, who they would learn was Sarah, sat in the corner, rocking back and forth, humming a single, monotonous note. And in the other, chained to the wall, was Lily. She was so thin, so pale, she seemed almost translucent under the harsh light. Her hair was hacked short. Her body was a roadmap of scars and bruises. But she was alive. Her eyes, vacant at first, slowly focused on his face. For a moment, there was no recognition, just the flat, empty stare of a person who had retreated to a place no one could reach. And then, a flicker. A voice so small it was barely a whisper. "Tyler? Is this real?" The moment of reunion was a blur of bolt cutters, tears, and the gentle coaxing of a broken girl named Sarah out into the world for the first time in 8 months. As Tyler carried Lily up the cellar steps and into the cool night air, she felt weightless in his arms, a fragile collection of bones held together by an impossible will to survive. "Is he dead?" she asked, her voice raspy from disuse. When Tyler confirmed that Carl was gone, there was no relief in her expression, no joy, just a quiet, solemn acknowledgement. And then a chilling warning. "There are others," she whispered, her voice fading. "He told me. The ones he sold. Some are still alive, trapped." At the hospital, the true cost of their ordeal became devastatingly clear. Lily and Sarah were suffering from severe malnutrition, dehydration, and a host of injuries in various stages of healing. But the physical wounds were nothing compared to the psychological devastation. Sarah hadn't spoken a word, retreating into the shield of her endless, one-note humming. Lily drifted in and out of consciousness, and when she was awake, she was haunted, screaming at shadows in the room. In a rare moment of lucidity on the 3rd day, she told Tyler about another presence in her captivity, a woman. "She visited sometimes," Lily whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "To check on the inventory. I never saw her face clearly, but her voice, like a teacher, disappointed." The detail was corroborated by Megan, who finally confessed the full extent of what she knew. Her father had a partner, a silent puppeteer he called the supplier. This person, she confirmed, was a woman who handled the international connections and the finances, a figure even Carl seemed to fear. He was merely the head of acquisitions. She was the CEO. With Carl dead, this invisible mastermind was now the sole inheritor of the entire network, and she knew about the survivors. That night, the proof of her reach materialized in the most terrifying way. The security cameras in the hospital's secure wing glitched for precisely 3 minutes. When they came back online, a note was resting on Sarah's pillow, just inches from where she slept. It read, "You saw my face, speak and die, stay silent and live." The supplier hadn't just been a ghost in Lily's prison, she had been in this very hospital. She had walked past FBI security as if it wasn't there. Carl was dead, but the true monster was still out there, and she was closer than any of them could possibly imagine. The supplier's threat note had its intended effect. Sarah, the young woman who had survived 8 months of hell, began to retreat. The humming, which had briefly subsided, returned with a frantic, terrified energy. She refused to eat. She stopped communicating with Megan, pushing away the notepad, her eyes constantly fixed on the door, expecting the woman with the teacher's voice to return at any moment. The fear was killing her more surely than any physical weapon could. The doctors were helpless. Her body, already weakened by months of trauma and neglect, was shutting down. She was dying by choice, silenced by a ghost. While Sarah faded, the network Carl had built began to cannibalize itself. 3 of his known buyers were found executed in their homes, professional hits that left no witnesses and no evidence. The message was clear. The supplier was cleaning house, erasing anyone who could potentially identify her, severing all ties to her former partner's sloppy operation. A wave of panic rippled through the underworld Carl had serviced. Arrests were made as lower-level players, terrified they would be next on the list, began turning themselves in, hoping for protection. But the big fish, the ones whose names were in Carl's ledgers, remained untouched, protected by a phantom who was proving to be more ruthless and efficient than Carl ever was. It was in this atmosphere of fear and decay that Lily Brennan made a decision. She was still fragile, barely able to walk unassisted, but watching Sarah give up ignited a fire in her that 2 years of captivity had failed to extinguish. She insisted on being wheeled to Sarah's room. She didn't try to coax her to eat or speak. She simply sat beside her, a fellow survivor, and whispered, "I heard her voice too. We both know who she island, and we're not going to let her win." For the first time in days, Sarah's humming stopped. A flicker of understanding passed between them. That night, Sarah asked for her notepad. For the next 48 hours, she wrote without stopping, documenting every conversation she'd overheard, every name, every detail, her hand flying across the page as if racing against death itself. She was creating a final testament, a weapon for a war she knew she wouldn't survive to see the end of. Inspired by Sarah's courage, Megan took a different path. She disappeared from her apartment, leaving a simple note for Tyler. "Sarah knows who it is, but she's too afraid to tell. I'm going to find out another way. Keep Lily safe." She was done being a victim of her father's legacy. She was going hunting, using the knowledge and instincts he had unwittingly taught her. Lily, however, found her own purpose in Sarah's final act. After Sarah passed away peacefully in her sleep, having written her last word, Lily took possession of the notebooks. She spent days poring over them, not as a victim, but as a cryptographer, looking for patterns, for hidden meanings, and she found it. A seemingly random observation tucked between descriptions of buyers. She knows where they meet. The barn on Tillman Road. First Tuesday. Sarah hadn't been too afraid to tell. She had been too smart. She had hidden the key in plain sight, a message she knew only Lily would understand. Lily knew it was a trap, but she also knew it was an opportunity. The remaining local buyers were getting desperate. With Carl gone and the supplier in the wind, their supply chain was broken. They would be looking for a new connection, and she would provide one. It was a plan born of trauma and rage, a strategy so dangerous that no law enforcement agency could ever sanction it. Faced with a broken system and an invisible enemy, Lily chose to fight back on her own terms. She would not be the victim anymore. She would become the predator. She would use the darkness Carl had forced into her as a weapon and she would lure the last remnants of his network into the light, even if it meant stepping back into the hell she had just escaped. The first Tuesday of the month arrived with a cold, biting wind that felt like a bad omen. The barn on Tillman Road was a skeletal silhouette against a starless sky. Inside, a single lantern cast long, dancing shadows. 6 men, local buyers who had grown rich and bold under Carl's protection, sat on folding chairs, their faces a mixture of greed and nervous energy. They were waiting for their new supplier. When the barn door creaked open, it wasn't a hardened criminal who stepped into the light, but a girl in a simple yellow sundress. It was the same dress from the clothesline, the one they had buried with Sarah. Lily had dug it up. She was wearing her own ghost. But the girl who stood before them was not the broken victim they had read about in the papers. Her eyes were cold, her posture was confident, and her voice, when she spoke, was steady and devoid of emotion. She had become a perfect imitation of the monster who had created her. "Carl is gone," she began, her voice cutting through the silence. "He was sloppy, emotional. I am neither. From now on, you deal with me." She paced before them, weaving a believable fiction from the truths she had learned in her captivity. She spoke of Carl's emergency stock, of new, safer routes, of a more business-like approach. She knew their language, their methods, their desires. She had learned them in the dark, in a concrete cell, and now she was using them as a weapon. One of the men, a local businessman, scoffed. "You're 18 years old. What makes you think you can handle this?" In a movement too fast to follow, a knife was in Lily's hand, its tip pressed against the man's throat. The room went dead silent. "I survived Carl Hendris for 2 years," she said, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. "I watched him work. I learned his trade, and I learned his mistakes. I am not him. I am better." She stepped back, the knife vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. The man sat down, shaken. The test was over. She had their respect. She had their fear. It was at that moment that the barn door burst open again. It was Tyler. "Lily, stop this!" he yelled, his face etched with horror. Megan was right behind him. They had found Sarah's note, just as Lily knew they would. She looked at her brother, her expression unreadable. "My brother," she said to the nervous buyers. "He's sentimental. Don't worry about him." She then raised a gun, Carl's gun, and pointed it at Tyler. "You shouldn't have come," she said, her voice flat. It was the ultimate betrayal. The girl he had fought to save was now threatening his life, ready to take her captor's place. The buyers, smelling a family dispute that could bring down the law, began to get up, ready to flee. "No one leaves," Lily commanded, the gun swinging toward them. But it was all a performance, a desperate, brilliant, and soul-crushing act. As the buyers were distracted, her hand shaking just slightly, Tyler saw it. She kept glancing at the corners of the barn, a silent signal, and then he understood. "The other girls," Tyler said, playing his part in a script he had just been handed. "The ones you promised. Show them to us." Lily hesitated, the first crack in her perfect, monstrous facade. And in that moment of hesitation, the night exploded. FBI, nobody move. The barn doors flew open, and federal agents poured in, weapons drawn. The 6 buyers, trapped and utterly bewildered, dropped to the ground without a fight. And Lily, she didn't run. She didn't fight. She simply smiled, a sad, broken, and triumphant smile. Then she threw a small digital recorder onto the floor. It had been running the whole time, capturing every incriminating word, every man's agreement to buy more human beings. "Sarah's notes identified them," she said, her voice finally her own, trembling and fragile. I just needed them to confess." The gun fell from her numb fingers. The strength that had held her up, the cold persona she had worn like armor, it all dissolved. She collapsed to her knees, sobbing, as 2 years of unspeakable pain, rage, and grief poured out of her. Tyler rushed to her, catching her as she fell. She had done it. She had finished the hunt Sarah had started. She had brought the monsters into the light, but the cost had been becoming one of them, if only for one terrible, necessary night. Justice, in the real world, is rarely a single triumphant moment. More often, it is a slow, grinding process, a war fought in sterile courtrooms long after the real battle is over. In the year that followed the events at the Tillman Road barn, 43 men from Carl Hendriss's network stood trial. Lily Brennan testified at nearly every one. Each time she was forced to relive her trauma, to describe the unspeakable, to face the men who had viewed her as property. Each conviction was a small victory, but each victory took a piece of her. The trials became her new prison. In the midst of it all, she and Tyler bought back the old Brennan farm with money from a victims' compensation fund. It was an act of defiance, an attempt to reclaim a piece of the life that had been stolen from her. She planted new strawberry fields, her hands in the soil, trying to cultivate life in a place haunted by death. The other survivors walked their own difficult paths. Some, like Amanda Reeves, went home to families who loved them but could never understand the depth of their wounds. Others, like Robin Martinez, whose baby did not survive, remained in long-term psychiatric care, their minds having shattered beyond repair. They had been rescued, but they had not been made whole. Lily, in a desperate attempt to give her own survival meaning, accepted a consulting position with the FBI. She had a unique and terrible gift: she could think like a predator. She could see the patterns, predict the targets, and read the subtle signs that others missed. In her first year, her insights led to the disruption of 8 trafficking rings and the rescue of 37 more girls. She was saving lives, but she was losing herself. The work forced her to live inside the mindset of the monsters, and the darkness began to stick to her. The nightmares worsened. The line between the hunter and the hunted began to blur. 1 year to the day after her rescue, she stood at Sarah's grave. The yellow dress she had left there was long gone, taken by the wind and the rain. "I'm trying," she whispered to the headstone. "But to catch them, I have to become them, and I'm losing pieces of myself every time." That night, she made a decision. She would stop. She had given 1 year of her life to the hunt, 1 year to honor Sarah. But she could not give it her soul. And so, her war ended not with a final dramatic victory, but with a quiet retreat. She returned to the farm, to the slow, patient work of tending the strawberry fields. The trials eventually concluded. The headlines faded, the world moved on, but for Lily, the past was never far away. It was in the scars on her arms, in the haunted look in her eyes, in the way she would sometimes pause in the middle of a sentence, lost in a memory no one else could see. Some of us come home, but we don't come home the same. The story of Lily Brennan is not a simple story of good versus evil. It is a story about the devastating cost of survival. It is a testament to the fact that you can escape a monster's basement, but you can never truly escape the memories he put there. They saved her body from Carl Hendriss, and through her sacrifice, they saved many others. But the fight to save her soul would be a quiet, personal battle waged every day for the rest of her life. The strawberries on the Brennan farm would grow again, sweet and red and perfect. And every basket sold would carry the silent, unseen weight of all the girls who never came home and the one who did but left a part of herself behind in the dark.